Hello, you wonderful people. So for today's video, I want to talk about a topic. I've been meaning to kind of talk about this because it's always something that's kind of floated around my head. And it's the aspect of, are cartoons just for kids? I know it sounds like such a simple question, but it's always interesting to me because I think so many different people have a different perspective on that. A few years ago, this is back when I was like 23, my mom had, I was watching Ultimate Spider-Man and my mom saw me watching and she was like, wait, you're watching cartoons just because it's like, oh, you're an adult. I thought you'd probably get out of that the moment you turned, maybe it's like, oh, maybe that's a teenage thing, maybe, but like once you're in your 20s now, you're still watching cartoons. And I just thought that was kind of a fascinating thing because I'm like, yeah, I'm watching cartoons. I mean, for one, it's Spider-Man, so I'm always going to like jump at any chance to watch anything Spider-Man related anyway. So, but I think it's just because in her mindset, it is like cartoons are such a kid thing, which I don't think they necessarily are. Because I mean, obviously you have plenty of examples like South Park and Family Guy being non-kid orientated, like animated stuff. That's not kid friendly, but just I guess in her, like I said, it's still that aspect. I guess because she watched me grow up, and that's always her mentality of like, oh, the live action TV shows and movies, that's one thing because that's a lot more adultish, I guess more mature, but like in her mind she thinks of everything animated as something kid related. And I think maybe that's a mentality she created because of my nieces and nephews, so maybe that instills that even more in her head. I mean, she's from a different generation, so maybe she just thinks like that. I mean, because it's fascinating to me because I never really thought of it like that, as like, it kind of crosses my mind a little bit, but never to that extent, because to me, like, animation is just another medium to like translate a story into, it's because animation allows you to tell a story in a very unique way that maybe you wouldn't be able to tell through live action, so I want to say probably what was the most recent movie it was either, I want to say it might have been Kubo and the Two Strings was like the most recent. And even though that was like a while ago, that was probably the most recent animated thing I've watched, like movie length-wise. And that tells a very compelling story, and I think, like, I don't know, like, I think that's kind of like, that's a movie like plenty of people have seen, people who are kids, who are adults, who saw that story. And I think it's still a situation where it's like, even though it might be, maybe for whatever reason, it might be orientated to maybe draw more kids, but maybe, I still think, even as adults, there are still things you can pick out from animations. Because there's even jokes, like when you go back, and I've talked about this before, plenty of people talked about it before, you go back to cartoons you watched as a kid, you rewatch them as an adult, you're like, well, those are jokes in there only an adult would get. Maybe it's meant to be like, oh yeah, you grew up with this thing, and then maybe you later on you reintroduce it to your kids, and you realize like, oh man, they were sneaking stuff like that back in like that. Maybe that's kind of the mentality about it. Maybe that's what a lot of animated stuff is meant to be like, oh, it's more of a family thing, so you can come with your kids and stuff like that, sure. But to me, it's just that aspect, because like, once again, it's the aspect of it being a childish thing. I think some people have that mentality. Another great animated thing, and that is Avatar: The Last Airbender. That show is fantastic. It is an animated show, but there's so much depth and layers to that show that a lot of people will probably tell you, like, that show, even though being an animated show, could put plenty of movies and TV shows to shame with how well constructed the story is, how well the world is built, the philosophy behind it, like the moral choices that the characters have to make. There are layers upon layers upon that show that I've like kind of dived into in the past, and it's like, I don't know if that was ever outright a kid's show. I'm sure it kind of probably, the demographic was more like probably teenager or whatever, but still, I think even as an adult, you can't help but appreciate the show, not just for its animation, but just for every little thing that makes that show into the fantastic show that it was. I mean, I also take something great like, like Pixar movies. There are plenty of adults who watch Pixar movies just because it's a situation of like, those movies can hit you on a level that you don't have to just be a kid to appreciate them. There are full-grown adults who tear up at Pixar movies because they hit you in that emotional level that maybe a kid won't necessarily feel that. Maybe they will. Maybe movies like that help formulate, I don't know, like some emotions or something like that. But obviously, like in an adult, like, maybe you can read more into a movie once again than a kid can. I don't know. These are just me surmising. I mean, another great example I can use kind of in the same animation department too is like, take anime, for example, which is also a big thing too. That's a big format for a lot of stuff to get translated in, which, anime and manga, like, can still be like very, they obviously hit different demographics. Some are meant for like kids to teenagers, others are meant from like older people because they can tell very bloody or violent stories in some cases. Kind of not really focusing on that, but more so like storytelling wise. You take something like Full Metal Alchemist, like easily one of my favorite animes. Like that's a series that's amazing. Once again, another aspect of like it has a story with so many layers to it. It's funny in some cases. There's drama, there's tragedy, and it tells this very compelling story that I think a lot of times maybe someone won't really, you know, they'll look at it just, oh, it's an animation, it's a kid's cartoon, that's all it is to it. But there's so much more to it than that. So I don't know, that's kind of my thought process behind it, because I mean it also kind of makes me wonder like, oh, what's going to happen when I become older, when I get my mom's age? Maybe because we grew up in different, you know, generations, maybe that will be a big aspect to it. Like, will I have the same perspective when I'm older? Like, if I ever have kids, will I, you know, I mean, I won't be jumping to show them like Full Metal Alchemist at first. I mean, eventually we'd get up to that point, but it's just like with everything that is in that series, like, you know, start off with some of the older stuff I watched when I was younger, and you know, maybe share that with them. But it's like, you know, it's like, oh, would it be weird for me to be like, oh man, I'm like this 50 or 60-year-old dude still into anime? Maybe on some levels that'd be weird, and maybe it'd be an aspect of like, once I got older, I grow out of it. I don't know. Like, I'm 26 at this point in time. I still like things animated. I still like the things that I like, you know. So I'm just curious. It's just kind of an interesting thing that I just kind of wanted to kind of bring up as a topic to you guys. And then ultimately, that is my question to you. How do you feel about that? Like the statement of art, like animated things just for kids. Obviously, I focus on things on a more serious side of things, in a sense, like, you know, anime, and you know, I use Avatar for example. But you know, even using stuff I grew up watching, like The Fairly Odd Parents, and you know, Ed, Ed and Eddie, etc., like different like animated cartoons back in the, like, do you think that it is just a kid thing, animation, or do you think no, it's for everybody, you know, or do you kind of agree with me where it's just kind of like it's a lot more complex than people think it is? Like, some people just treat it as kind of a simple thing of like, oh, if it's animated, it's for kids, you know? So I don't know, I love to get to know your opinion about it. It's just kind of like a fascinating like subject I've always kind of had rummaging through my mind on occasion that I just kind of want to share with you guys. So really, that's all I want to talk about in this video. Till the next time we meet, be happy, be safe, live life to the fullest, and enjoy it. Good day and good